Green Fortress is just right around the corner, only about a month away. And with that comes a lot of discourse about what may or may not be in the update. War paints, community fixes, and most of all, spells. Whether spells should or shouldn't be added in this next update is something I've been seeing everywhere. First of all, before we can even discuss that, we need to go over what spells even are. Spells are similar to festivizers in that they are tools that you apply to your weapons and cosmetics to modify them. There are 4 general types currently in the game. First of all, there's voices. The voice spells are changes to your cosmetics that change the pitch of your player's voice when you equip them. They'll either become really deep or really high-pitched.
The outcome was never really in doubt.
Next one is paints. They're kind of like regular paints, except they're chromatic. They shift in color, typically ranging from one color. For example, chromatic corruption goes between bright and dark purple, fading in between the color. Footsteps is the other third type of cosmetic spell. This spell, whenever you walk, it leaves a little trail behind, leaves a little flame trail whenever you take a step. Lastly is weapons. There are several different types of weapon spells, and I'll go through each of them. First of all is Exorcism. Exorcism, when you have it on any weapon, makes it so that anytime you get a kill with that weapon, little ghosts appear on the corpse. Halloween Fire changes flames to be green, such as the flamethrower, degreaser, flog, all of those. Lastly is Pumpkin Bomb, which replaces a bunch of different explosions with a pumpkin bomb explosion and a purple smoke. It can be added to like rocket launchers, sticky bombs, even sentry rockets for some reason. Spells were found generally across the map in the form of gifts during Green Fortress from 2012 to 2014. In 2015, however, they completely discontinued spells, replacing them with what we now have, which is the Soul Gargoyle. Anyone who owned spells in 2015 got their gifts completely wiped in their race, never to be used again, just deleted from their inventory. There was a loophole for a bit, however. Valve chose to make the system work in a way where whenever you opened up TF2, it would check to see if you had any spells or gifts in your inventory. If you did, the spells would then be deleted. However, if you simply just didn't open TF2, you could still trade those gifts with other people, such as people who are already in the game and open TF2 already, which caused them to not be erased. It was a very weird loophole, but one that was around for about a year until Tough Break, where Valve made them completely untradeable. The discussion around spells sparked my interest when I uploaded my own spell on the workshop recently, Magic Missile. In the comments, I noticed an argument pop up whether spells should or should not come back, hence this video. The largest and most repeated statement I heard was, "We do not need spells." I personally have always had an issue with this argument. It's hard to say what can and can't be in the game because that's not the community's job, really. That is entirely up to Valve to dictate what is and isn't good for the game and what should and shouldn't be in it. But this got me curious, so I did some digging. Should more spells be added? It's been nearly a decade since they were first introduced after all. First of all, could spells even come back in this next update? Why are we even bringing this up? Well, the leading opinion is that Eric is a lot more willing to be more experimental with these next updates. Valve has lately been adding cosmetics that require completely new code that they had to work with the community with to make them even function in the game. That shows that Eric is willing to work with the community again to add new stuff, that they're experimenting with new content. In fact, there are rumors that they were experimenting with custom war paints, although that obviously fell through as we didn't even get any war paints in this update. But it seems like Eric is more willing to add spells. There's no point in even having a discussion if there weren't a small chance that spells could come back. I'm not saying guaranteed that they will, but there is this small chance that they might. Hence why discussion is happening. Now, why were they even discontinued in the first place? Why did Valve decide to wipe spells completely? It's completely unknown, unfortunately, as Valve is horrible with communication. They never say anything about their opinions, what their choices are about the game, nothing about that. But generally, the community has come up to consensus about 2 major reasons: performance and visibility. The first argument about performance is an interesting topic. People assume that spells, because they're particles, inherently make the game laggier and perform worse whenever you see a spell in-game. This is frankly just not true. Most spells do not impact performance at all. They just simply swap out existing particles. For example, Pumpkin Bomb just swaps out the explosion and trails of rockets and replaces it with the custom ones. And same with Halloween Fire. Halloween Fire is basically just a recolor. The only one that could cause issues and has caused issues in before is footprints. Footprints did cause a little bit of issue because every single time you took a step, it would create new particle entities, which did cause some impact on frames. But that's not really the case now. With 64-bit, we don't really see a general drop in frames because of footprint spells. This isn't really an issue. And there's also the fact that workshoppers are a lot more competent when it comes to particle making. The custom spells that we make on the workshop genuinely do not impact performance at all. We typically try to test it in-game to make sure that it doesn't hurt the game negatively. As long as Valve decides to choose good spells from the workshop, then this argument means nothing. It is entirely fair for the general community to assume that spells would cause some performance, but this really isn't true. The next argument, though, is a lot more real and more concrete, is the issue of visibility. People argue that spells can impact gameplay. They occlude the game. They're not very transparent in their effects. They hurt team recognition, stuff like that. That is entirely fair. That is entirely justified. Spells like my recent magic missile effect, for example, if 6 to 12 players were to use it at the same time, then yeah, absolutely, it could definitely impact the game. But this is really only the case for bigger spells, such as like Pumpkin Bomb, which displays explosions, which are a really big deal in TF2. If there were that many players in the lobby, then yeah, absolutely, it could hurt the game state. But if Valve were to reward spells in a very rare manner, then we would only see maybe max of 1 to 2 people per server having spells. And also, you really don't see spells that often because they are Halloween restricted. Valve has implemented something called Halloween restricted as a tag for some cosmetics and spells, which means that they can only be seen during Scream Fortress and full moons. Valve applies this restriction to cosmetics and spells because they impact the game. They are really out there with how they affect their game. So you would only really see this during Halloween, which is already a very hectic game mode, by the way. Scream Fortress is such a clusterfuck of visual and auditory noise that spells really don't add too much on top of this. It's already a complete mess. During full moon, I kind of agree because that means once a month spells can impact the game. I totally agree with this. It would have to be handled in a very delicate manner. Cosmetic spells, for example, just don't really impact the game at all. You don't see people complaining about footprints or voices or really the paint jobs to affect gameplay in a meaningful way. Weapon spells, that's harder to handle, but that more relies on what spells are added. Some spells mean completely nothing to the game, like adding a green fire to your huntsman or something like that, but like other ones, it's a matter of what Valve adds to the game. That being said, I do agree. I definitely agree that this is a pretty strong argument not to add spells, is visibility and impacting gameplay. My general opinion, though, is that they should be handled like taunts and like hats and cosmetics and unusuals, where we have to make sure that the ones that do get in don't impact gameplay in a negative way. But that's really just how all content in TF2 should be handled, not just spells. The next point is, why should they even be added in to begin with? Why should we introduce these? I've come up with a few arguments, and one of them is variety. Consistently, in every single update, we're getting more and more particles in the form of hats and taunts. This past summer, we got 38 unusual effects. 38. God. With spells, it would introduce new variety with particles. Instead of just getting hats and taunt effects, we would be getting spells, which are entirely a new form of particle. It would be unique content that we haven't seen in a literal decade. It would breathe some new life into what we get into an update. Nowadays, with these seasonal content updates, we get the same content each time. It gets stale, it gets dull. It's just bloat. With spells, it would be kind of unique. It would be a new piece of content we haven't seen in a while, as I said before. The next point is hoarding. Currently, nearly all spell weapons are being hoarded by something called whale traders, collectors who hold on to hundreds or even thousands of spelled items and either just refuse to sell them at all, or if they do, at an extremely inflated upcharge. In the past year or two especially, there's been such an uprise in upcharges. For example, I have 2 spelled weapons. One of them is a Halloween Fire Flog, and the other is a double spelled Exorcism Pumpkin Bomb Beggars. Both of those have absolutely skyrocketed in price in just the year alone. They've nearly doubled or sometimes tripled in price just because they have that small tag that changes their particles slightly because of these whale traders. They are so insanely rare because people hoard them that the general community doesn't own a spelled item, or if they do, it's like a really meaningless spell like Exorcism or like a paint job or something. Adding spells again would mean that the general community can enjoy these spells again, that the majority of players can enjoy spells once more. The other argument is motivation. Currently in the workshop, I am seeing such a drought in motivation and inspiration currently. It's everywhere in the workshop. Particle makers only really make hat and taunt effects because that's the only things that Valve adds. You really don't see a lot of spells. You don't see a lot of weapon effects, stuff like that on the workshop because Valve just doesn't add them. Why would you waste your time on a submission, on putting your heart and soul into an effect if Valve just isn't going to add it? We are seeing that with actually war paints too. The fact that Valve hasn't added a war paint in over a year means a lot of people are being burnt out with making war paints. People are dismotivated to do that. So if Valve were to bring back spells, or especially war paints, then that will bring a lot of new life into the workshop. It would motivate people to make these types of items again. It would motivate us to make new content, be a lot more experimental with the workshop as well. Now, what would they even add? Would they bring back the old spells or the new spells? Bringing back and returning the old spells, I'm kind of against this. Reintroducing them would absolutely fuck up the market in such a dramatic way. You can argue that bringing these whales to their knees is entirely awesome. Yeah, bring down the kleptocracy. Woo! Yeah, but in the long run, huge upsets like these and changes to the community market is never healthy. An example of this is the crate depression. A few years ago, Valve screwed up with an update and caused a few crates to be unboxable with 100% unusual drop rates. Anytime you unbox the crate, you would get unusual. We are still feeling the impact of that even post-patch, even after they fixed that, with many old school hats and effects being insanely cheap because of this upset. Then again, I do have to acknowledge we have managed to survive market crashes like this and more in the past. And we could potentially be fine if they do bring back the old spells. I do acknowledge it. I completely acknowledge it. But it's just not healthy to introduce something that could really upset the market, because it wouldn't just be whales that would be impacted. It would affect the market in ways that like I couldn't really predict, because I am not like a virtual economist. I don't really specialize in stuff, but it would have impacts that really wouldn't be healthy for the game. Now, what I do propose Valve adds is new spells, specifically workshop spells. Workshoppers have taken it into their own hands to make their own spells, and some of them are really interesting, like new muzzle tracers, explosions, medi-beams, and so much more. There are so many spells for Valve to choose from as well from the workshop, and they would only need to choose about 3 to 4 for a quality update, in my opinion, rather than choosing, again, 38 unusuals. If Valve chose this option, I do hope they become extremely picky and selective about what they choose, though, because only the best should really be in the game rather than this. Now, the last thing I'm going to bring up is how would they even introduce this? How would they add spells back into the game? I have a few different methods that I'm going to propose here. The first one being the same as they did before. Back in the old days, as I said before, they would be random drops that you can find throughout the map in the form of gifts. I'm not a huge fan of this. There's a reason why they completely replaced this for the gargoyle. The biggest one, in my opinion, is botting. If Valve were to just freely add spells as like gifts scattered around the map just by playing the game, that would be botted to hell and back. Like, yes, cheating bots have been kicked out of the servers, but this would bring motivation for botters to bring back idle bots that just walk around the map and collect these gifts. That's what they would do. I guarantee it. The second option is a bonus drop from crates. I really like this idea. The idea behind this is that you would make spells basically kind of like unusual fires, where they have an extremely small chance to be unlocked, like less than 1% chance as a bonus drop from unboxing a new cosmetic case. So instead of getting like unusual fire or unusual, you could unbox a spell, for example. I personally really like this idea. it would motivate Valve to add it because it brings in revenue for them, which the previous method doesn't. Instead of making it so that like everyone would get spells and make spells extremely common, this would still keep it pretty rare, which is a good thing for spells. One of the qualities about why spells are so wanted, because they are rare. They should become rare, except not as rare as they currently are. As I've said, whale traders hoard almost like 98% of all spells, but they should, if implemented, still be rare and unique, kind of like unusuals. The third option is one I've heard several times, is a rare drop from completing contracts. Currently, when you complete contracts during Scream Fortress, you get rewarded with this like pumpkin gift that when unboxed gives you a cosmetic, a Halloween restricted cosmetic. But with these crates is a very, very rare chance for a bonus drop. Something, for example, being a spell page that you can put into your spell book. It's created like cosmetic, means completely nothing. But what Valve could do is, as a bonus drop, once again, similar to the crates, a very rare bonus drop could be spells for completing contracts. It would motivate people to play these maps like random drops method 1, but it wouldn't be botted, because you would have to complete the contracts. You would have to kill players. You would have to defend the point, capture points, stuff like that. It would motivate people to do contracts rather than just getting cosmetics. I'm a huge fan of this, and it would mean that we as the community wouldn't have to pay for these spells. The only issue is that Valve probably wouldn't add this method because it doesn't generate them really any revenue. It means more people are playing their game, yes, but Valve loves FOMO. They like making people unbox and gamble because that's how they make most of their money with this game. So I don't see Valve really implementing this method. The third and a half like method is a shop system like the Jungle Inferno contracts. This is an off branch of this previous point, is making a shop system similar to Jungle Inferno, where while completing contracts you earn like tickets or points that you can spend on spells. This is kind of just like another method for completing contracts where you can pick and choose what spells you want, or make it a lot easier to get spells. The fourth method is a very strange one. I think someone mentioned this while I was doing an MVM tour, was making an entirely new MVM mission. I don't see this happening, but I just want to bring up this point, is Valve could, in theory, make a new Halloween mode only MVM mission. Kind of like Wave 6 exists, but only make it restricted to Halloween mode to Scream Fortress. And as the reward for completing this mission, instead of like an Australium, which is an extremely rare chance, instead of getting an Australium as a very rare drop, you can make it a spell. This is a very interesting idea. It would motivate people to spend their money to play these missions, which would be an entirely new branch of content. Like, getting a new MVM tour is something we haven't gotten as well in nearly a decade, but I don't see Valve doing this really ever. This would require Valve to make an entirely new MVM mission, which is a lot of work on top of adding spells. It's very unlikely Valve would add this, but this point was a really interesting way of implementing spells that I had to mention it. The fifth and last idea that I recently saw was actually in a thread. It was the idea of rare transmutation or crafting bonus drop. Once again, it's a bonus drop. This is a really interesting idea. Basically, the idea behind it is, currently, with the Garreg oil, its main purpose is to Halloween transmute. You put 3 different cosmetics in and get a new cosmetic. It basically helps you recycle and reuse your duplicate or really bad cosmetics to potentially get a better one. This is an okay system, but what if, kind of like the bread box, where every time you did a transmutation, there's a really small chance, once again, to get a bonus drop spell. This would motivate people to circulate through the cosmetics and stuff. And another method could be through crafting. You could add a new crafting recipe, similar to like doing like 3 refined for a Halloween cosmetic. Add a really small chance, kind of like I think Golden Wrenches had back in the past, where there's this really small chance of adding spells. I really like this idea, specifically because it solves an issue we're seeing in the market, which is the huge, massive abundance of refined metal. Refined metal currently is pretty much worthless. It's not even like a penny anymore. Like, you have to have like 80 refined just to make 1 key nowadays, because there's so much refined in metal in the system and not really many ways to use it. You don't really see people using their refined metal for anything. This would motivate people to use their refined metal to potentially get a spell. It would really help the economy, in my opinion. So with that all out of the way, I want all of your opinions on this. I personally think Valve should add spells. I really think so, if it wasn't obvious. I very clearly biased in this video. I really want spells in the game again. I can acknowledge there are some issues with it, such as like visibility and how they impact the market and stuff like that, but I really want them back in the game. I grew up in a time with this game where spells weren't really a thing. I've been playing this game since around 2012, but when I say 2012, I was like 8 years old. I didn't comprehend what spells even were. I'd never used them or anything like that. And it's like that with a lot of other players too. I know so many players who didn't play until like post Jungle Inferno. They barely know what spells even are, and they never like got to use them themselves. Please, Valve, I beg of you. So with me ranting for half an hour about articles in this game, I'm gonna send you off here. Once again, I want your opinions on this. Please, I beg of you. So, yeah.